My name is Stephen Collis. I'm the chair of the Department of English at SFU. And for the last 20 years, I've been a member of our organizing committee, the committee that has curated and organized the Writer-in-Residence program at SFU. And that's been an exciting ride for 20 years. And there are numerous, and maybe I'll even really quickly point out, Clint Burnham has been on that committee since 2006 or so, something like that. Sophie McCall, I saw, has been on the committee since, when did you start, Sophie, 2005? Four. There are others here, I'm sure, from our committee's long and storied past. If I'm not mentioning you, just shout at me. No. Oh, Jeff Dirksen was here briefly earlier. He had to leave. A lot of us hasn't seen Jeff for a number of years, but he was here. Yeah, I want to begin by acknowledging where we are. And where we are is on the unceded and never surrendered territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. As far as, and I'm sorry, I'm moving around while you're photographing. When I think of those acknowledgements we do at these occasions, sometimes it can sound like it's about the past, acknowledging something that has occurred and is now complete. I don't like to think of it that way. It's very clear that occupations, displacements, and land thefts continue in this world. These are present and future realities, and I like to keep that in mind. And I like to think when one is making a land acknowledgement, one is also declaring one's position and declaring a form of opposition. There are many writers in this room, and I think there are many writers in this room I know who that's very much what's happening in their writing, is they're declaring their opposition to the way things currently stand. Okay, is this volume getting better? I feel like I can hear the amplification, no? Sam? Sean? Sam's my sound guy. Okay. I can see you. Well, that's good. We will nonetheless move on and soldier forth. My first task, though, is really to introduce the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Laurel Weldon, Dr. Laurel Weldon. This program has also benefited for 20 years from support, first from the Office of the President of SFU, and since then, on many occasions for many years, the support from the Office of the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. So Dr. Laura Weldon is a distinguished professor of political science and a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Her community organizing, public policy, and international aid experience is extensive. And she's a dean who's written a poem or two. Please welcome Laura Weldon.
I'm going to give this a shot. Can you hear me? Okay. They tried to give me a microphone at a public event I was at recently, and I said, I'm a professor, I don't need that.
Don't step on your glass.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the tip. Yeah, okay. So, thank you, Stephen. I'm just talking about how I feel self-conscious about calling him Steve or Stephen now. Steve, thank you. Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased that everyone could join us to mark this momentous occasion tonight. I also want to join Stephen in respectfully acknowledging that SFU is located on the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including specifically where we are today, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. One of my colleagues at SFU has helped me participate in language revitalization by learning some words of welcome in the Squamish language. My colleague, Chris Lewis, or Sitaktan, is his indigenous name. And he tells me that I can use these words of formal welcome for a large group. And it is Hatsquile Tanoyop, which means welcome to you all, you good people. So welcome to you all in the language of the Squamish people. I love our Vancouver campus that we are on today, and so it feels fitting to me that we are here in downtown Vancouver, where I get to be part of this event. When I was a young writer myself here in Vancouver, I used to attend the Drunken Boat poetry readings around the corner down in Gastown, named not because of being drunken, but after the poems by Rimbaud. I leave you to make your own conclusions about what young poets were doing. And there was so much exciting stuff going on in those days in Vancouver, storytelling festivals, writers groups, readings, arts exhibits, just so many exciting things. And I remember that I was such an unconscious out-to-lunch person, and I'm trying to draw a contrast with today, so just bear with me. And I got to hear writers like Mariah Campbell and Lee Maracle, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was so lucky to hear them, and now I can't believe that I got to sit there and talk to them and learn at their knee. Gastown in those days, this whole downtown area was full of life and art and love. And I loved that I got to be in the middle of it. Loved it. And I hope that SFU and FAST can be part of creating and sustaining a meaningful, joyful, healing, creative arts community. And I think that events like this one tonight put us on the right path. This is why I'm honored to have been asked to open tonight's event. As the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, I am so proud that my faculty is home to the Ellen and Warren Tallman Writer-in-Residence program in SFU's Department of English. Tonight, 10 past writers-in-residence are here to read and share their wisdom. You may recognize these writers for their prestigious awards and critical acclaim, but I would also draw your attention to their commitment to mentoring, to their commitment to the community aspects of the residency, and to their willingness to give back to the community. And I'm so grateful that they have agreed to participate today and to share their work with us. The benefit to the university of having writers of this caliber on our campus, mentoring our students, our staff, our faculty, our local community members is tremendous. FAST and SFU are immensely proud of this program's vitality and accomplishments. So welcome to the Ellen and Warren Tallman Writer-in-Residence 20th Anniversary event. Tonight, you will be treated to two groups of incredible writers. The first will read selections of their work to us. The second group will engage in a roundtable discussion. So the first group of writers, 5 writers, who will be reading selections of their work tonight include Junie Désil, the program's most recent writer-in-residence, 2024. I did say I have 10 writers, so get ready. Daphne Marlatt, the program's first resident writer, 2004 to 2005. Michael Turner, 2009-2010 writer-in-residence. Mercedes Eng, 2022 writer-in-residence. Hiromi Goto, 2008-2009 writer-in-residence. Welcome Junie, Daphne, Michael, Mercedes, and Hiromi. Let's have one more round of applause for them. And I'm glad you got your hands warmed up because now we have the second group. And these are the 5 writers who will gather for a roundtable discussion to close out our tonight's event. This is the second part of the event. It will be Sam Wiebe, the program's... And he is the program's second and most recent resident, 2023. We have Fred Waugh. And Fred was the program's third resident writer in 2006-2007. We have Carleigh Baker. The 2019 writer-in-residence, we have Larissa Lai. The program's second resident writer, and last but not least, Anakana Schofield. 2017 to 2018 writer-in-residence. So welcome, Sam, Fred, Carleigh, Larissa, and Anakana. Anakana, thank you. I was worried about that, and I thought it sounded like a Canadian pronunciation, so I would just go with it, but yeah. But it did sound a little weird. This is an incredible group of talented people that well represents the 20 years of this residency program, from 2004 till now. So thank you to all of them for being here tonight. I'd also like to thank the Writer-in-Residences program primary donors, Sarah Kennedy and Kiernan Kane. Although the program has received generous support from several sources over its 20-year history, Sarah and Kiernan have been unwavering and steadfast, and what incredibly inspirational and generous folks these are. Thank you to you both. We can all be so excited to look forward to the future, the amazing writers who will next be able to take up the residency as we underline and support the crucial importance of the arts in this time of uncertainty. This program would not be complete without paying homage to Roy Miki. The Writer-in-Residence program in SFU's Department of English was founded by Emeritus Professor Roy Miki in 2004, whose vision and drive, without whose vision and drive, we would not be here today to celebrate 20 years of this program. So I am very glad to be able to announce today that there is an event celebrating the life of Roy Miki happening at SFU's Harbor Center tomorrow. And I'm sure many of you will be attending it. I know that some of the writers that are here tonight will be there. So thank you, Roy, today, we wanted to say, and rest in peace. I promise this is the last thing I say, and then I'll let you get to the action. But I didn't want to stop without recognizing SFU's Department of English. Thank you to the Department of English. Thank you to Chair Steve Collis, to Rebecca Salustris, who's around here somewhere, oh, there you are, to all the current and past chairs, the faculty members, the staff, we can't name you one by one, but you know who you are, who've made the Writer-in-Residence program a priority, ensuring that it thrives. Thank you to everybody. I commend the many ways the department has supported this incredible program. And I know what it's like. It takes blood, sweat, and tears. You're doing other stuff. You're so busy. Thank you for doing this for our faculty and for our university and for our community. I'm so proud that SFU's Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences is the home of this department and program, and every writer-in-residence here, you can always call our department and our faculty your home. Can I please invite everyone here for a final round of applause to celebrate our writers-in-residence, the residency program, the donors, and the Department of English. A round of applause. And now I'll hand it back to a real poet, Steve Collis.
Thank you.
And English chair. Yeah.
Thank you, Laurel. I'm going to try and be as brief as possible so we can get to our writers reading to us. And I think Laurel's covered a lot of the ground we need to cover, which is wonderful. Just a slight programming note structural note. We'll be taking a break partway through. So after the first 5 writers read, there'll be a short break. You can go get another drink. There's a few snacks left out there. However, stay for the second half when the panel discussion happens, because immediately following that, there will be a lot more food appearing in this room at around 9 o'clock. So don't go anywhere. There's a whole bunch of food going to arrive. That's important. So I just want to add just a little bit about where this program came from. And a lot of it's been at the very least gestured at already, if not more. But this really was Roy Miki's idea back in 2004. And probably, I would imagine, trying to remember now those years, probably in the years leading up to that, he was thinking about this and trying to figure out what we would do. There was a period of time, if you go back to the 1970s, there were creative writing classes happening at SFU, and then they sort of petered out and disappeared in the 80s to 90s. And then when I started in 2000, I can't remember who the chair would have been at that time, but someone said, would you like to teach a creative writing class? I thought, cool, sure. And we slowly started bringing that kind of stuff back into the program in English at SFU. And Roy was not actually interested in teaching creative writing. He'd done his tour of duty. He's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. But Roy was obviously supporting writers and communities in all sorts of other ways. And one thing that Roy really thought would be an important thing to have is to have living, active, practicing writers in the department. It's actually part of SFU's legacy. When the department was founded in 1965, Warren Tallman at UBC was called upon to offer some advice. How do you found an English department? And one thing he said was, you got to have a poet there. I don't care if they're an academic, I don't care if they have a PhD, but you should have a poet on staff who's just there to be the poet who's around the department. You have to have one person there that's a poet. And they took that seriously, so they hired a poet. That poet, Jack Spicer, unfortunately died before he could take up the position. And they offered the job to Robin Blazer. And Robin Blazer came in to teach at SFU and to be a poet, who's nonetheless on the faculty. I think Roy had that background in mind. There was something to be gained by having a living writer, an active writer whose focus in life was being a writer there at your university in an English department. And so I just want to comment briefly on that aspect of this. And that's the significance and importance of having a writer at a university. And I'm going to quote Ellen Tallman, who I interviewed in 2005 at her house. And I thought I really wanted to get a sense of these writers that she had been bringing to Vancouver, because people were thinking, starting in the 1950s when Ellen and Warren came to Vancouver to UBC, they were bringing all these writers from the U.S., the crazy avant-garde West Coast poets they were bringing up here. And it was Ellen who knew the poets from her Berkeley days. Ellen knew the poets, and she would say to Warren, you got to bring so-and-so, you got to bring so-and-so, and that's who was bringing the poets up here. So I really wanted to hear about this. So here's Ellen. From our interview. I taught for 17 years at UBC. From the time we came up here, but I just had a BA from Berkeley. I've been doing my master's in creative writing at the University of Washington, but I had my children and I was working full-time while Warren finished his PhD, and somehow I didn't finish my degree. I finished everything but the thesis. I know this story. So at UBC, I was teaching English 100, but then I started teaching Arts 1, which I did for is it getting a weird echo here now? Can you guys hear me? I'm getting such a serious echo. Arts 1, which I did for 8 years. We had lecturers from outside and all over. And we each had 15 to 20 kids, and we met 3 times a week in these small groups. Very intensive reading and writing. The themes tended to be things that included Freud, lots of philosophical work, even Einstein, as well as War and Peace, you know? Of course, throw in War and Peace there. It's casual weekend reading. It was the perfect course to be teaching when all the poets were coming, because I could bring them in there to the big meetings. Kids wouldn't have heard of Allen Ginsberg, wouldn't have heard of Gary Snyder, but there they'd be teaching for a couple of hours, and then we had stuff at the house. I love the stuff at the, there's people in here the room right now that were involved in 1960 and stuff in the house. We'll get to that later in the second part. But I love that. I love that we get to that point where she talks about, just the importance of bringing a writer in, what it meant for her as a teacher to have, to introduce students to a writer, someone who's just, that's what they were. They were a living, practicing writer. That's what they were up to. And the value of them interacting with their students. I really think that shaped what we've done at SFU with the Rent a Residence. And I think when it comes to stuff at the house, you've got to build the house, and that's where I would also like to thank Sarah and Kieran for the help in building this house. We gave Sarah and Kieran a large, heavy, weighty copy of Roy's Flow, which I thought was the appropriate gift. And so I just really do want to thank you again for both of you for making this possible and keeping us going for another 20 years, which is where we're headed. Okay, let's get to writers. And I'm just going to call you up. I'm not going to give you introductions. There's no time for that. I'm going to say your name. That's what you get. You're famous folks. People can look you up online and find out more about you if they don't know who you are already. So I'm just going, and I think a fairly random order that I wrote your names down, and that means I'm looking at Junie Désil right now. Please welcome Junie Désil. You might want to hold that. Is that okay? See what happens if you try that, but I don't even know what's going on with that.
I'm good at doing 2 things at once, so.
Lean into that and see what happens.
Can y'all hear me? Oh, yay, okay. Okay, I know we kind of don't have time for thank yous, but I do have to say a few thank yous. And to say that I am deeply honored to be here, to be the 20th amongst such luminous, gifted writers on the 20th anniversary of SFU's Writer in Residence program. And of course, thanks to Ellen and Warren Tallman Selection Committee, and a special thank you to Tara Parsons, who managed all the bookings. So if she can hear this, or send that message to her, please. This program is so special. You know, I first came as a baby poet when Cecily Nicholson was the writer in residence at the time. And this past year, I got to help help. Wonderful, brilliant writers share their work, have dreams about their work. And I wish some of them could actually be here reading their work. And I actually wish I could share some of the thank yous they sent to me, such lovely, wonderful emails of thanks. So I'm just going to get right into it. I'm going to read from part 3 of my forthcoming collection called Allostatic Load, coming out April 15th from Tallman Books. And I'm going to read from part 3 called Medicine. And first I'll start with a little epigraph is what I believe it's called. Reparative care requires a transformation in the way we hold, exchange, and interact with one another and the web of life. This comes from Rupa Maya and Raj Patel from the book Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice. That was published 2023. Today I walk through our neighbor's orchard. He points out variegated ornamental grass, a fruiting woody peony. The pods hold seeds, lima bean green and large that will turn black, he says. Hands me a peach with a little conspiratorial smile, then a large fig, soft, and my fingers imagine pulpy, melty insides. A mulberry slyly handed as I reach for a sweet green plum, bursting sweetness. Points out a Spartan apple tree and a hazelnut tree raccoons have feasted on, a fig tree nibbled by deer, he says laughingly. I muse on how obsessively I used to wash store-bought fruit, soaking them in concoctions of ACV, or apple cider vinegar, or ocean salty water, now sweet nectar from unwashed fruit undulating down my throat. It rains. We've longed desperately for it. My bones neither portend nor divine its arrival. They've muted their protest to a dull and rare flare-up, so I'm pleasantly surprised at the wet whisper and murmur of water on parched soil. Petrichor and a summer of hellfire commingle in the cooled night. Pleasantly surprised that I am not sob-walking to a hellscape or an appointment or through life, pelvis tightened against threats, real or imagined. A shield, a barrier that has failed at a job that it was not meant to do. So it rains, the smell of parched life, thirst slaked, and a hope of dampening these hot spring seasons, fall, and the inevitable Narnian winters. Our breathless oceans signal alarming climate change. That anxiety pales in comparison to the day-to-day weather patterns. My body's a war zone, strategizing and plotting where to lob its stabbing weapons. I'm at war with my body, pretending to be neutral. Tell myself to touch grass as a reminder, to ground myself, check in with the natural world. I touch grass often. I touch grass often now. Grows in wild profusion, smell, rain, and look at jeweled spiderwebs glinting luxuriously in the sun, water pearls, diamond bright. He has beautiful flowering trees, this elder neighbor. One time he dropped by with fresh caught salmon, sweet sunripe plums, and plump, fragrant blackberries, purple mulberries that stain lips and fingers. In my previous life, I scheduled acquaintances and loved ones like appointments. I couldn't handle spontaneity, and here a neighbor happily, unknowingly, interrupts a work Zoom call to hand me this bounty of local seafood and fruit. In the morning, I listen to the loudness of life, the now familiar sound of the little red hummingbird you can hear nearly a mile away long before it zips by eye level, motor-like sound, mooing drifts from the valley. Sometimes guests come over, used to shrill sounds that emanate from their screens, rapid-fire snippets, beat clips, voiceover, unnatural speed, robot tones, manufacture earworms, multiply, mar, natural cacophony, slow, rapid thousands of sounds their layered array dizzy-making. Thank you.
Thanks, Junie, and thanks for consecrating the microphone that it works now because you spoke into it. I just want to note, I love the fact that you mentioned, what did you call yourself, a baby poet visiting Cecily? Cecily visited Wade Compton when he was writer. There's an interesting lineage. Not that y'all are 3 different generations, but that's kind of amazing. And Merce, I'm looking at you, and Merce, you visited Fred when Fred was writer in residence. And there's a lot of that. And a number of the writers, Sam down there, Jordan Scott, were former SFU students, many of whom benefited from the writer in residence program before they went on to publish their own work. So I will shut up now and introduce someone who I love introducing because I've done it a number of times. Daphne Marlatt, please. Welcome.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Junie. I hope this is working. Yes. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, I was one of Warren Tallman's students way back in the 60s, and I benefited from his prioritizing of poetry. And I want to say a few words about the program. Perhaps because Roy Miki did so much to restart SFU's writer-in-residence program, I found that unlike other universities where I'd served as writer-in-residence, the English department at SFU was welcoming, warm, and supportive. Now, that's important because if you're a writer-in-residence and you fly into someplace, you're quite estranged. And if the English department feels, well, oh, that's just a writer, she didn't do all the work to get here, it's tough. So I much appreciated being at SFU. That was a really wonderful year. And also, I wasn't new to SFU because I'd served as the Ruth Wynne Woodward Chair in Women's Studies in the late 1980s. Roy had been publishing line issues, including my work at times, and eventually line editions since 1983. So I think a lot of that support and warmth was due to Roy and also to the presence of 2 other extraordinary poets who preceded me in the department, Robin Blazer, George Bowring. And now this whole new cohort of younger poets like Steve, like Clint, like Jeff, have really placed SFU on the poetry map across Canada. So thank you all. And if you want to hear more about Roy, come to the memorial tomorrow. You'll hear a lot about him and all he did. So I thought I'd read you a brief excerpt from what I was writing at the time when I was writer-in-residence. And it's a book called The Given. It's a memory text in prose fragments. So this is the start of the second section, 1953. Only she, to begin with, she, which means about, and so begins the long pulling of a thread from the trammel that underlies all this, the way any of us are tangled in the past. She with her little shoes and small hat, clopping down the road with a full purse like any good donkey, lipstick and comb, compact with mirror, cologne-spattered hanky, crumpled Avon calendar with its birthday record, flower of the month, stone of the month, bobby pins at the bottom half buried in old powder folds, and of course the vinyl wallet with its well-used compartments tearing apart at the seams. But she wasn't walking. She was driving. A humped black Pontiac with silver streak Indian head on its bonnet. That era, heading home, but braking to a stop in front of Burdett's because she'd forgotten tomato sauce. And at least they'd have that on their shelves. Dearer than the Super Red, of course. Still, it meant the children wouldn't complain. So Canadian. Who ever heard of tomato sauce? All right, ketchup on fish and chips. frozen last resort after a late afternoon because the doctor she'd had to take one of them to, which meant taking all three, was late as usual, and they'd had to wait a good 40 minutes in that horror of a waiting room, airless and stuffed with women's magazines, the women themselves preoccupied with keeping their kids well behaved, the endless, when, mommy, when? Oh, the endless lie of it. Just a few minutes more, darling. Long minutes to skim against her better judgment and half-heartedly, pages full of advertisements, full of advice. Keep your hubby happy. Hubby? Such awful slang. Greet him with a smile when he comes home from a hard day's work. As if this wasn't work, this endless waiting. What right had he, that cod-faced doctor, to keep children in suspense like this, all the while listening to the sullen kicking at the chair lay beside her? Now stop it for the 100th time. To sit here in birch tendril flurry, light morning breeze, at home in the signs of a hot day, sniffing a trace of incense from next door, sniffing for durian a few blocks away, Trace's body memory will rise to greet, facing birch waver outside my window, leaves opaque in their height of summer green, slightly sticky. Flurry of leaves, a flurry of sparrow wings. Some days seem miraculous, this being in the midst of it all, this being at all, now that I'm the age she was when she died. Dummer, dummer Reitersman, der mich nicht verstehen kann. Lehar, Bizet, Verdi, foreign languages cascading through the house, always to the rise and fall of ebullience, pathos, melodic repeats. Not that her taste was popular in a city where sewers were more to the point than opera. Thank you.
I got called a younger poet. I'm going to introduce another young fellow, and that will be Michael Turner.
I don't know what to say to that. I will say thank you, though, and thank you to Daphne and to Junie for your readings. Thank you also to the Writer and Residence Committee, David, and everybody who's been pointed out. I have to say I've been in a lot of committees in my life, and I have never seen a committee move so quickly through the agenda, rivaling of a kind of Doge vibe going on there. But don't get too expedient, but don't change. I'm under the weather. But I'm past the contagion stage. My doctor says I have a community bug. It's nothing big, nothing serious, but it's like a localized flu. It sounds like that. So I'm going to read 3 poems from a book I published with Anvil Press in the autumn, and it's called Playlist, A Profligacy of Your Least Expected Poems. And I won't get contextual. I'll just read these 3 poems and then I'll sit down. Day After Creation, after P.F. Sloan and Barry Maguire. Western nest implodes, hugs relax, seeds sprout. I'm too young to nurture, so I'll abstain. I have a critique of peace, its feather duster bouquets, a desert sown with thoughts repealed, and I listen under, for once, your enemy. I consider you the day after creation. I am alert to your listening. I hear the joy you're arguing for. When a hole is pulled, one walks through it. Here everyone is spent, a nest in its bed. Place an ear in me, free to soothe me. And I listen, under, for once, your enemy. I consider you the day after creation. Your water's barely happy, think it's thinning. You're standing there, pretty vacant. I will straighten these lies, mainstream them, arm a legion of engineers to build bridges with them, for lonely wanderers to cross into one another. If animals disregard the pack, the lone sane nest gives pleasure, and I listen under for once, your enemy. I consider you the day after creation. Feel what love has done for blue Hawaii, and listen within for Harare, Zimbabwe. I can't arrive there at any point in time, and if I leave, it's a time I'll never know. The plucking of harps, the shame, the glory. I won't promote my life, only remain in it. Love my pen pal, despite our clumsy remembrances. I listen under for once, your enemy. I consider you the day after creation. I consider you the day after creation. It's called Reparation Landfill. It's after Jimmy Webb. Fall stood still for them, stolid on the back foot, after retreating from the fleeing, imprisoned by billboards, a cold and fearful culture, a polka dot of opposites. Reparation landfill, frozen in sunshine, salty white in spots, gray in others. Nobody drained this place. You can feel it giving in, a sudden crunch underfoot. Nature had a way of returning. Ah, yes. You forgot your swim trunks, dark and hardened, hanging with the bats above my head. A bee crawls drunkenly across my foot. A young woman stabs at a parking meter. Here once stood your only poem, as you had read it. No other realities you claimed, all of them forgotten. You licked a popsicle to its stick. Allowed me to free you from this listening. For what you feared, your death is. What you feared is dead. I was never a chorus. You neither shared nor discarded death. You neither defiled nor sought defilement. You never lost the aura of disgust. Your indifference tar amongst the nesting eider. For what you feared, your death is. What you feared is dead. You thought of me with certainty. And I have one more poem to read. Wow, where did it go? Where did it go? Here it is. The book is too small. A square job after Joni Mitchell. Tomorrow, a professor will lecture on weapon systems. Teaching aids include a carboy of sandflies, courageously gathered from a stagnant sea, resuscitated through its reflection of a launched rocket. The semesters turn left or right, the sculpted golf carts forward and reverse. They're freed by space's service road. They can drive into the future in both gears, turn left or right or left, outside a square job. For years, this professor was passed over for promotion, swam every night in the campus pool, thoughts of, if you were younger, powering every stroke, threats of, not on my watch, in the eyes of faculty. 32 semesters later, sessional appointments, professional disappointments. We hear ourselves think, go faster, time's a-wasting. Then I kick into gear, jump bullets for that square job. Cheers.
Got such a soft spot for Merce. It's so great to introduce Mercedes Zhang.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. So the Writer in Residence program at SFU has been life-changing for me. When I started studying at SFU, Fred was the writer in residence, and we read Diamond Grill in a Canadian literature class. And I remember walking past Steve's office and him offering to introduce me to Fred, but I was so nervous and weird that I ran off. And actually for quite some time could not call Fred Fred, but referred to him as Mr. Wah. So yeah, the program has just been really incredible for me. I will always think of Fred as my writing daddy. I did that unsophisticated thing that people do where I asked him about himself and his life rather than maybe the writing. And it was necessary for me. And then next year, the writer in residence was Wade Compton, another mixie, maybe not my kind of mixie, but another one. And so I also did that same thing of not being cool or sophisticated and talking to Wade about his life and experience rather than the aesthetics of the book, which I loved. And these two writers set me up very well in terms of confidence and encouragement, so that when I went to see writer in residence Hiromi Goto next, and she was super no nonsense, and schooled me on showing, not telling, and identified a piece in a poem that I wrote that then became a book about my dad called Prison Industrial Complex Explodes, so I'm very grateful to Hiromi for that. And then this cool thing happened where folks like Cecily Nicholson and Julianne Okoth-Bitek and Anakana Schofield, my poetry and fiction sisters, were writers in residence, and then this bonkers thing happened where I got to join them. So it means a lot to me. I'm going to read a couple poems from my new book called Cop City Swagger, which was occasioned by this fucking mayor and his love of the police. Safety does not look like 100 new cops, 100 new Car 87 nurses, a Ruru Remen finance bro mayor buddying up with a billionaire. Safety does not look like cops investigating themselves, cops opting for retirement and joining the material. Safety does not look like big trucks with thin blue line stickers gunning their motors. Does not look like decamping the downtown east side, calling security on aunties and popos, practicing chai tea in Chinatown Plaza because they don't have a permit. Safety does not look like Indigenous mothers writing their children's names on their children's arms so that their children can be identified if their limbs become separated from their bodies, if their bodies are not intact. Safety does not look like Indigenous mothers and families investigating their daughters' disappearances and murders because the police's negligent investigations ascertain their daughters' deaths unsuspicious, even when their daughters' bodies are not intact. Safety does not look like Gastown, Chinatown, Strathcona, Railtown residents who loved everything everywhere all at once but don't care about displacing aunties and popos who look like the protagonist. Does not look like protection of property over poor people, corporate values of a fun city with swagger, determining a teenage white boy's racist threats unthreatening. Safety does not look like cops at Memorial March, cops at Pride, momentarily worn orange shirts over VPG uniform for photo op. It certainly doesn't look like fucking say something, see something, say something. Safety does not look like a branch of the Bank of Montreal staff calling 911 on a grandfather for trying to open a bank account for his granddaughter using their government-issued Indian status card. Does not look like the VPD handcuffing a grandfather, Maxwell Johnson of the Heiltsuk Nation, and his granddaughter for being Indigenous while trying to open a bank account. does not look like wellness checks, compassion fatigue, inattentional blindness, feminisms that seek to punish, that seek to essentialize, does not look like golf shirts and smaller guns, does not look like deploying detective sniffer dogs in the recently rebranded Community Industry Response Group at protests calling for the end of the killing of children. Safety does not look like people at Crab Park drinking $8 coffee, saying unhoused people shouldn't have the pets that they have for companionship and safety, while the expensive coffee drinkers, purebred dogs piss on the grass people want to sit on. Safety does not look like weaponizing dogs, a fire marshal's order to decamp the downtown east side over fire concerns, a femme aflame on the street, failing to inform businesses located in a 100-year-old building on fire watch that the said building is on fire watch, failing to inform residents living in a 100-year-old building on fire watch that is, or building that is on fire watch. And safety certainly doesn't look like empty fire extinguishers at a 100-year-old building on fire watch. Does not look like cop-enforced injunctions to dismantle tent cities, diverse hiring and cultural awareness training. Does not look like blue walls of silence, any team whose name begins with assertive. Safety does not look like being incarcerated under the Mental Health Act. Okay, but that is the wound, so let's get to the fucking medicine. Care. Care looks like 100,000 new social housing units, 1,000 new public washrooms. Care looks like catching people when they're trying to defy gravity. Care looks like using the buddy system to and from a blockade that shut down the city's port, the biggest port in Canada, third largest port in North America, to show solidarity with the Palestinian people. Care looks like providing fire extinguishers to unhoused people who use fire to keep warm and to cook food. Care looks like food security, access to clean water, masks for East Van, OPS vans, naloxone training, safe supply. Care looks like looking away if a hungry person takes food that they didn't pay for. Care looks like fighting for social housing, affordable housing, and inclusive, equitable Chinatown. Care looks like a radical rethinking of rights that moves from individualism and charity to mutual aid. It looks like a living wage, free transit. Care looks like feeding the hungry children of Vancouver who need food programs in their schools, not cops. Care looks like shared risk, understanding fight, flight, freeze, fawn, trauma responses. Looks like peer-to-peer support. Care looks like your workmates grabbing extra bad date sheets, condoms, and lube if you miss the van. Care looks like Tracy Morrison walking towards you, bannock in one hand, clean syringes in the other. Hundreds and thousands in the street, despite police surveillance and violence. Care looks like care pods, chosen families, assistive technologies like vibrating or flashing light, alert systems to warn deaf residents of a fire in their 100-year-old building on fire watch. Care looks like a 5-hour Palestinian poetry sit-in led by students, despite those students already having been positioned as a threat to some other students' safety. Care looks like a fully funded Canada Disability Benefit, CRIPS for eSIMs for Gaza, a daughter and a father staging a model minority mutiny, consent-based models of medical treatment. Care looks like defunding, disarming, dismantling, and then rebuilding from the ground up. Thank you.
Thanks, Merce. That's what our writers can do. That's what we can bring. Thanks so much. We have one last writer, then we'll have about a 15-minute break to fuel up a bit, and then we'll have a relatively brief panel discussion before the real food gets here. So please welcome Hiromi Goto.
It's a great honor to be here. Mercedes, thank you for that. You're lit. Thank you to the Ellen and Warren Tallman Foundation and SFU Dean of Arts and Social Sciences and the Department of English, to the many donors who make this possible. I don't know that all of us writers are frontline activists. Some of us are, and some not, but I like to think that art creates a wedge, and art creates a seed that can burn inside people bright and become an enormous force that will take over the entire world. And so there's a necessity for our voices, and so very grateful that it is supported here. I'm writing much more slowly than I ever did before, and I'm just reading an excerpt from a short story that I've been working on for perhaps 3 years. It's just in the middle of it. It's called Understory. Someone who lives by the cul-de-sac has put up a hockey net. Weathered pucks litter the verge. I've never seen anyone out here practicing. From the distant rifle range, the sound of popping. Sometimes people walk their dogs. Most weekdays, these Wasanich forests are still, but for a bird song, the ponderous swish, swish of the wind through raven's wings. But when it rains like this, all you can hear is the patter, and my heart calms, and my spirit can tendril outward. I enter forest. There are many paths, and the deer people are keepers of a lot of them. Their systems crisscross and intersect, merge and disappear. I don't understand their logic, but that's because I don't understand their language. When we first moved here, I was curious about the forest. I didn't know anything about the island's ecology. There are some human-made trails, some made by mountain bikers, some left over from logging days. They went towards bigger parcels of parklands that surround this area. But I was curious about the forest that didn't have human thoroughfares, so I walked out from our newly rented cottage toward the back of the septic field, past the landlady's bigger house, and onto a bold, hard-packed path. Trust me, the path said. It knew where it was going, and it would take me somewhere, and back again. Okay, I said. I followed its shape between third-growth fir trees down into a gully, through an open bluff, and back into trees for the path to disappear. I slowly turned around in a circle. There was no path at all. My heart began thudding. This is how easy it is to get lost. All those people who had to call 911 and ask for emergency assistance. I pulled out my cell phone. I only had 1 bar, and the battery was in the red. Fool, I thought. In my desperation, I couldn't remember my new address. Panic swamped my chest, choked my throat. Had I written the details in my address book? I tapped in my own name in the search bar. Past me had written it down. Relief swept over me when I saw the red pin in the green map, my little blue circle that positioned me, the faded blue directional lines that showed me which way I was facing. I turned 45 degrees to my left. Our cottage lay that way. It's been over 3.5 years since that day. I like to think I'm a little less foolish, and I've come to know a lot of the paths. I've made tree friends like the lyric willow in the seasonal bog near the cottage, or old manzanita bush who overlooks the bluff and has only one seam of life remaining, a single spray of leaves. If you get to know the individuals who make the forest, then forest becomes familiar. When I close my eyes in bed at night, I can orientate myself in relation to specific trees, clusters of larkspurs, vines of honeysuckle. the way old times fairware seafarers made their way across vast oceans by knowing the stars. There, there, and there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hiromi. Thank you, everyone. We've got until 20 after, so we've got about 15 minutes to mill about, say hi to your friends, grab another drink, and we'll come back with our panel here at 8:20. Thank you very much. We have 5 of our past writers, another 5 writers, past writers in residence seated here who I will very quickly introduce. But we're going to have a brief and casual conversation. So I will ask scintillating questions, or actually just sort of average and barely intelligent questions, but loose and open, which will hopefully people will be able to say whatever they want to say in response to. But just very quickly, I'll try and do you in the order you're sitting right here. So first we have Fred Waugh, who was writer in residence 2006-07. Then Larissa Lai, 2005-2006. Larissa's younger than Fred, but she was in there before Fred. I'm not quite sure. I think Roy didn't want to make his buddies go first, maybe, or something. I don't know. Next is Carleigh Baker, who was writer in residence in 2019. Anakana Schofield, who was writer in residence 2017-18. And the baby, Sam Wiebe, writer in residence in 2023. And like the most popular writer, like Sam sells copies of his books and people make TV shows out of them, so it's a serious situation. So, well, maybe I have to stay here. It's hard to look at you and have this in front of me, but I'm working on it. The first question is just really simple and just asking for reflections, really. So what do you, and did you, as writers, get from the residency? But really, I think the way to think about it, because I'm curious about this, so many of you published books in years immediately following the residency, like not long after you were writers, you published a book. You did, didn't you, Fred? Because I would think Isadora came out maybe around that time, not long after you were writer in residence, maybe? Can't remember. I can't either. Well, let's go with that idea. I think so. But that's really amazing. So I'm just curious about what that was like. Being the writer in residence and actually writing, which is one thing we've really tried to prioritize. We try not to overburden the writers. I hope that you're all going to attest to that, maybe. But to provide you some space and resources and time to write. And I feel like you all did that. Can you actually write a book in an office in the AQ of SFU is one question perhaps to ask. But I don't know, just to reflect on that, what it was like being a writer in residence and you were writing. What up? That's as intelligent as I can get right now.
You asking me?
I'm asking all of you, Fred Waugh. I'm asking all of you. And anyone who's ready to speak up. Anakana, you're ready to say something.
Does it work?
Yes.
Yeah? Oh, okay. Wow, I stepped forward and now I have to think of something to say. Okay, well, so I should start with a very, very brief potted history of my experience with writers in residence, because I went to, it's funny because I saw Hiromi at the VPL as a writer in residence. I saw Ivan Coyote at the VPL, and then I went to SFU and I met with Wade Compton, and that was a novel that I never published. But I remember Wade saying, and it was a section of a novel, and it was about fellas like digging a road. It was about road builders. And he said, it was the best compliment at the time. He said, I felt sure a man must have written this. So I was like, yes. It was fellas digging a hole. And then I saw Lisa Robertson. I'm sorry, I'll get to my writer in residence in a second, but Lisa Robertson I saw, and I don't know if anybody remembers my novel Martin John from 2015. Well, so Lisa Robertson, who's a poet who can't be with us tonight because she lives in France, she pointed out something to me that I was doing in the language that was actually a clerical error. I was just writing it like with one tense and then writing it in another tense because I just couldn't decide. And Lisa said, this is really interesting. So I always thought, wow, that novel would never have been the novel it was if I hadn't had the good eyes of Lisa Robertson grace it. So I come to this program, you know, as somebody who kind of, I mean, I was a 42-year-old, but who grew through the program. I'm also just a member of the community. Like, I'm not in the university. I'm not institutionalized, sorry. Sorry.
Not yet.
I should be, if they hadn't shut down those asylums. No, but I'm not institutionally attached. So I think what I really, really love about this residency, and whoever those holy, blessed people are who are funding it, you, take a bow and thank you, is because this is one of the few residencies where God's plain people can get on the bus, go up the mountain, and meet with a writer. I mean, I was just on the gram, boosting Junie, telling people, get on the bus, go to SFU and meet Junie. Because these are the ways that we need to bring people in, because otherwise it's just MFAs and people who have access. And so I think not to play down all of the work that they're doing in the university. So that's just my little potted history of going. And then being the writer in residence, well, my favorite thing was that I got to bring Catherine Silva, the translator from San Francisco, who's probably one of the most significant translators of Latin American, South American fiction. And I got to bring her to Vancouver. I loved it. I absolutely fucking loved it up on that mountain. I loved the view. I loved the little window that didn't close properly. I don't know, I just have really great memories of being a writer in residence. In fact, that's the best job. I mean, you know, I've since had the misfortune to teach sessional, and it's just not a patch. It's just seriously not a patch. That's fine, I got my own. Oh, okay.
Everyone's got their own. We're rich in microphones. Anyone, please, hop in and top that.
Carleigh. I knew you were going to ask a question like this, so I thought about it, and I too will get to my experience, but I wanted to say first that I'm thinking about the importance of the program right now and going forward, because the places for writers to be writers are disappearing right now. And the funding is, I'm going to say a few things and then I'm going to talk about cycles, but the funding is drying up right now. Reading series are disappearing, and people are having to go and fundraise from folks who don't generally have a whole lot of spare money. Writers have more money than we say we do. We all like to pretend like we're sort of poverty, but I feel like it's with a very few exceptions, most of us wouldn't be able to be writers if we didn't have some level of safety net available to us. And that's certainly, I just used us, but also, that was certainly my situation, is my folks would never have, they were always able to help me. But things are looking grim right now at a time when creativity and the arts could, I try not to use should, because should is such a heavy word, but could and should, I'll use it now, be guiding us and helping us sort of, I know certainly when I sit down to write right now, it's because I feel sort of at the end of my ability to cope, and then I sit down and start writing again, and I feel like, okay, yeah, you've got something to offer, you can be part of something. you can do something, you can be a voice, and not the voice, but a voice. And that's really important. And those, right now, when it should be blossoming, those opportunities are disappearing. And so something like this, a situation like this with a writer in residence, but not just a writer in residence position, but one where you sort of get the opportunity to decide how you want to work within it. And I am a hermit, and I could certainly be a writer in my living room, and I generally am a writer in my living room. I wrote my first book in bed. As a matter of fact, it was only the fact that my body got a little bit older and couldn't handle writing in bed any longer, and I had to switch to the couch. Maybe I'll buy an ergonomic chair next. But I could do that, but when I do that, I'm just, all the information is sort of going out and then coming back in this loop. And when I was at SFU, I was reminded that it's actually, sometimes it can seem like I'm so exhausted, how could I possibly be part of a community? Like, how could I give? But when you give, or I keep saying you, I try to keep it to I statements, but just roll with me on this. That when I give, I realize that reciprocity, that feeling of being part of a loop that involves other people, feeds me, actually feeds me. And with students, that is my favorite, because they are on their way into something, and they're wrestling with stuff. And my situation, I was a writer in residence, and then was a Shadbolt Fellow, and I taught my first course at SFU. Half the course was pre-pandemic, and the other half of the course was when it happened. And so that was my first time teaching. I just finished my master's degree. I was a late bloomer. So that happened while I was there. And then I went from being someone that was just, we were doing writing, storying climate change. We were talking about climate change. And then, so we went from talking about something that was important to all of a sudden being right in the middle of something that was devastating. And my students were coming to me and saying, like, I'm not sure if I'm going to get this in on time because I literally have to pack and get on a plane and go home. And there's lots of things about my process that were great, but specifically about SFU that was so powerful was that I went to the folks, because you kind of get thrown into teaching, I guess. There was no handbook that was given to me, but what happened there was that the folks who were my supervisors or whatever, I went and said, like, I just want to give these folks everything. I don't want to worry about grades, and I don't want to worry about I just want to make stories with them. And I got 100% support from the folks that were my supervisors. And so we got to make stories in a time, like when I finished that, I took to my bed. Like, I'm not even lying. I took to my bed and I didn't get out of bed for 3 months. So getting to do that in that particular situation and getting to make stories with those folks, when it was time for me to get out of bed, I thought about that. And I thought about the fact that the folks who are coming up and who are learning how to make stories when things are just sort of nonstop hellscape, that's really powerful. And those folks have got some amazing skills. And I'm really grateful that I got to be a part of, sometimes I don't want to take too much credit, but I got to be a conduit for those folks while they were learning those skills.
Anyone? Larissa, say something.
I can say something. But where to start? Okay, so the question is, was I able to write? I was able to write. But in the spirit of the conversation so far, maybe I'll say a little bit about how I got there and the time it was, because it was 2005. That's a long time ago. It's a long time ago.
20 years.
It's 19 years. Oh my gosh, it's 2025, right. Gong hei fa choi, everybody, it's 2025. Oh my gosh, it's 20 years. Well, when I think about that time, it was a really kind of interesting moment for me, both in my own life, but also in a moment, it was an interesting cultural moment. So I was a writer organizer who came up through, I was just talking to Michael Turner about this, who came up through the anti-racist and queer and feminist cultural organizing of the late 80s and early 1990s. And that whole period, so the late 80s and the early 1990s were just this amazingly generative period for me. I was just saying, we were just having that conversation. I was just a little bit too young to really be in the thick of it. But I was old enough to understand what was going on around me. And I was a sponge, and I was a brat. And so I soaked up so much of the critique and the rage and the intelligence and the confusion and the bitterness and the infighting and all of the wonders and horrors of that moment in ways that I think is really sort of like, it was that was the moment that changed my life. And created the possibility, I think, for the kind of work that I'm doing now, for better or for worse. So that moment, so that was happening in the late 80s, early 1990s. There were a couple of really kind of key conferences. I was talking to Daphne Marlatt earlier about the Telling It conference, which was really, if anybody ever has a chance, it's out of print now, but it's an amazing book that comes out of that conference and documents the struggle of a conference that Daphne organized involving Indigenous women, Asian women, and lesbians, a really interesting kind of collectivity, and a conversation that was so beautiful and so painful and so entangled in ways that I think we still have a lot to learn. But then with the related ones, The Appropriate Voice, Writing Through Race were biggies. So by the time the late 2000s, all through this time I was trying to seek a way to write. The possibility of a writer in residence, that wasn't something I knew about. I didn't know about writer in residence in the 90s. I don't know if it was as much of a thing. I didn't make the kinds of engagements that, for instance, you, Anakana, did. Yeah, I didn't know that such things existed, and I don't know if they existed to the same extent in those
places. Yeah.
Did they? Okay, I didn't know. I had no idea. And so I was finding it by hanging out with guys like this. Fred and Roy and, Hiromi Goto and Rita Wong and a little bit later on, David Cherry, and Pinder Dulai as well, I see. Pinder Dulai, I'm Lai, you're Lay. So there were, and Mark Nakata, there was a whole crew. Anyway, so I was seeking all through that period, and I did do a bit of writing in the 90s. And then as the turn of the millennium hit, everything changed. Partly, I think, is the difficulties, the contradictions of what kind of work we were doing. By the time the late 2000s came, everything was just in a state of collapse, and then 9/11 happened, and the funding structure shifted, and it just became so much harder to do the work. And so I ran into grad school, for better or worse. And I had the residency just as I was finishing my PhD. And it was an incredibly productive moment for me. I think the residency in a sense allowed me, curiously, a kind of momentary respite from the struggles of academia and a return to that 80s, 90s moment. I think because a lot of the folks who were there had also, people like Steve, like Clint, like, Jeff Dirksen, and David and Sophie, who understood that prior moment, were there, along with Roy, trying to make this thing happen. And David Cheriandi very generously gave me his office for the year. Do you remember that, David? I just moved in. I'm like, okay, thanks, David. I just took it. And I was able to write. So I think I was working at that time on a collection of long poems. I was thinking a lot about, curiously, Roy Miki's work. I'll talk about it more tomorrow, the essay agency in particular, and his thinking around the problem of the speaking self from an Asian Canadian location. And so that's what that book was doing. And I think I wrote the bulk of it during the residency.
That's great. Wow. Sam, you're ready to go. Come on.
Oh, yeah. I always feel like I have to follow these very smart people, and it's just like, I got nothing. So I did want to just say that, like, I came to SFU as a student, and I didn't grow up, like, seeing a lot of writers. They were just names in a book, and I remember that Hiromi came to one of our classes, and I also remember once I was a TA and I had an office, I was walking and I saw Michael Turner in his office, and the door was open, and I was just like starstruck. And I think I said something really smart, like, hardcore logo was awesome. He just kind of went, yeah, whatever. But also, like, as a grad student, I was lucky enough to have Mercedes in my our same year, and like, first person in our cohort that, like, introduced herself to me. Now we have to, like, follow her. You know, maybe the greatest public speaking writer in Vancouver, and so getting to come back as a writer in residence meant a lot, and I don't take that lightly. It's really great to be able to give back and to see a younger generation. I talk to Isabella Wang once in a while, and, like, just seeing, like, how talented people are coming up, and I have people that I met with coming back. I mean, it means a lot. As far as getting anything done in the office, they were working on the toilet next door when I was there.
They still are. They still are.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
Keeping it real.
All right, Fred.
What was the question?
Well, what did the residency do for you? How did you encounter and experience it? What was exciting about that? But also, I'm just curious, do you remember that you were writing and do you remember, Fred?
Well, memory. Should I use?
Yeah.
Is this working? Yeah. Because I'm so old, memory is a big thing for me, and I'm so grateful to be invited here today, and grateful to be able to be here today at my age, but to be part of this, all of these other wonderful writers who are still very productive and working people. But I've thought a lot today about what this has meant to me. So I'm just going to wing it if you don't mind. In 1962, I took a course in linguistics at UBC from a guy named Ron Baker. He was the head of, no, he wasn't the head of the, he taught a linguistics course. And Ron Baker was the first chairman of the English department at the new Simon Fraser University in 1966, I think it was?
65.
65? And I knew Ron, and Ron had was always very interested in a bunch of us writers, Lionel Kearns, George Bowring, myself, and the sort of Warren Tallman group of writers from UBC. And we were all interested in linguistics, and when Ron became chair at SFU, I wrote to him and I said, "Well, I'm ready to teach now. I'm ready. I need a job. I was in graduate school at Buffalo, and I said I'm on a job." He said, "Well, that's great, Fred. Just but we're not hiring anymore right this year. But there's this small college at Castlegar called Selkirk College that they're hiring. Why don't you just go there. So he said, and you'll come, I'll give you a job here next, a couple of years or whatever. Anyway, I went to Selkirk College in Castlegar for 20 years and and loved it, and it was one of the best pedagogical experiences I've ever had, being in a collegial institution, not just one of these top-down institutions. Anyway, so I had always wanted a job at SFU, so when I got the offer for a writer-in-residence in 2005 or 6 or whatever it was, I thought, wow, I finally got a job at SFU. But I really would like to highlight, if I could, if you don't mind, just to flesh out, to me, the program at SFU is singularly one of the, and I haven't been writer-in-residence at a lot of programs, at several, but not many, but it's a singular program. And it's singular partly because it's here in Vancouver, and it's part of a culture that I feel very close to over the most of my writing life. And it has a lot to do with Warren and Ellen Tallman, and so I'm so glad Sarah is here and is still part of this, and so that all continues. But that this jettison of energy that was started for many of us at UBC in the late 50s, early 60s by Warren and Ellen Tallman has continued. And here we are in 2025 still. Sorry, yakking about it. But I wanted just to kind of contextualize the program a little bit because I think it's very important. Partly because I'm old and I only think of history. But it's very important to remember that this program comes out of an incredible creative context here in Vancouver. From the 60s, 70s, 80s, and it's just, it really is a kind of keynote program at the center of all that. So the fact that Roy got this going in what, 94, was it?
No, 2005.
What?
It was 2004.
2004. And I go back, tomorrow we're going to talk about Roy, and it's so lovely that this dovetails with this memorial to Roy, because he started the program, and he started just as one of those things, many things that he's done. Is the ocean of things that Roy Miki has done, and he just, let's do a writer-in-residence program. And he did it so well. He did it with that paying attention to what was going on in Vancouver and in Canadian literature and in race writing and in the whole social embedment of writing in the late 80s, early 90s, that the program carries that, and it's just lovely to see a writer-in-residence program that can carry this energy that Roy Miki was able to, had to give to that. We'll talk a little bit more about Roy's tomorrow, and it's quite immense. But the fact that it comes out of a whole history of the Capilano Review at Cap College and the West Coast Line, the Line magazine, the library. There's, I think Tony Power was here earlier. But there's this whole context of writing that has been centralized at SFU that this program is part of, and not necessarily represents, but is simply another thread in that whole thing. The milieu of Vancouver for this program was SFU. And I remember coming back in the 70s, I was teaching at Selkirk College, and we would come down to Vancouver. I was a graduate of UBC. Most of my friends, Tallman, Lionel Kearns, George Bowering, and David Dawson, Daphne Marlatt, et cetera, we were all from UBC. Where did we go? We went to SFU. That's what was going on. UBC wasn't interested in us. But Simon Fraser had a culture going on in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s that was really comforting to those of us who grew up in the 60s in Vancouver and 70s in Vancouver, who wanted something different, who wanted something fresh, wanted something a little new. And that was fostered, of course, by people like Warren and Ellen Tallman, but many others, Robin Blazer and just the whole department at SFU has all these years been so supportive of that culture. It's not so much, and it's important to realize that this culture was supported by an English department at Simon Fraser, sort of flying under the wire, almost. I should say that just in terms of this particular program, I'm so grateful that I was asked to be part of it, and that Roy finally gave me a job at Simon Fraser. But there's the surplus value of any writer in residence program. We're all solitary writers, even if we're writing in bed or wherever we are. Writing is a solitary activity. The chance to be a writer in residence is a chance to be released a little bit from that. And there's a kind of surplus value in the whole environment of the community, of talking with students. I know when I was here, it was so great to be able to mix with graduate students. Right? To have a bunch of graduate students. Although they were idiots, they just they were all.
Is this where the cuff rub off?
No, I mean the real people in the writer in residence program were the people who came to see me for help. And those were people, some of them were students, a few of them were graduate students, but others weren't part of the university community. They were community people. They were, pardon me, housewives or people who were, had been relegated to other way of life, and this was a chance for them to get out. So it was the community, and that's a big thing. The wider community of being able to work with other people is really important to a writer, particularly when you're just stuck in bed. So. By being there as writer in residence, you're not just solitary. I think that's important. All of us are writers when we're writers. We're writers when we're writing. And writing is a very solitary activity. You're sitting there hammering it out, working away, blah, blah, blah. Socially, it's bereft. So being a writer in residence is an opportunity, a great opportunity to be that. And I just wanted to say to the younger writers, I know you're complaining about the fact that you're not being as supported as you could be, but I come from a culture where there were no writing series, there were no writers in residence, there was nothing. So be grateful.
I knew you would all be loquacious, and I didn't have to do very much. So thank you for that. And one question's all it took. It wasn't even a very good question, but you all were amazing. Yeah, I don't know, Fred. It's It's just gone now. It's gone. There is food out here. There's the bar open. We're here for another hour if you want to hang out. Let's get all 10 writers back up here for a picture. And if you are around tomorrow, there's a panel in the morning starting at 10 o'clock across the street at Harbor Center, 10:30 at Harbor Center across the street, and then an afternoon memorial reading from 2 to 4 in which people will be invited to read a poem or say a few words about Roy Miki. So come on back if you are able. Thank you very much, everyone.